My name is Susanne, and at 27, I graduated with honors from university after 4 years of working 3 jobs while studying. My brother Ryan, who barely passed with C- grades, got a brand new car from our parents. I got a formal bill for rent, complete with a lease agreement. The contrast was as stark as the silence that fell when I opened my envelope while everyone cheered for his keys. I didn't yell or scream. I simply left, but not without a note that changed everything. Before I tell you how my note transformed my family forever, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Growing up in our 2-story suburban home in Connecticut, the rules were always different for me and my brother Ryan. My parents, Martha and George Anderson, weren't wealthy, but we lived comfortably in a middle-class neighborhood with manicured lawns and weekend barbecues. Dad worked as a manager at an insurance company, while Mom ran a small catering business from our kitchen. We never went hungry, never worried about the lights being turned off, but there was always an unspoken awareness of financial boundaries, at least for me. From the earliest days I can remember, Ryan was the golden child. 3 years younger than me, he had this natural charm that made everyone laugh. His blue eyes, so like our father's, would twinkle with mischief before he did something that should have gotten him in trouble, but rarely did. When he broke Mom's favorite vase playing baseball in the living room at age 8, she hugged him and said, "Boys will be boys." When I accidentally stained the carpet with watercolors at age 10, I spent the weekend scrubbing it and lost my allowance for a month. I learned early that approval in our house came through achievement. While Ryan got praised for participation trophies and C grades, I strived for perfect scores, joined every club, volunteered on weekends, and still found time to help Mom with her catering business. My room became a shrine to certificates, medals, and honor roll announcements, not because I displayed them proudly, but because these were the only times my parents seemed to notice me with something approaching the warmth they naturally gave Ryan. During high school, the pattern continued. Ryan joined the football team, barely maintaining the minimum GPA required to play. My parents attended every game, my father bellowing from the bleachers while my mother organized the team's snacks. Meanwhile, I captained the debate team to state finals, and they sent me with the neighbors because they couldn't miss Ryan's regular season game, where he mostly sat on the bench. When college approached, I applied for every scholarship possible, eventually securing enough to cover about 60% of my tuition at State University. The remaining 40% came from working weekends at a coffee shop, evenings waiting tables, and early mornings stocking at the local grocery store before classes. Ryan got a full ride from our parents when he followed 2 years later, despite his mediocre grades. They wanted him to focus on the college experience, not be distracted by work. After my sophomore year, I moved back home to save on housing costs, converting our unfinished basement into a small but functional apartment. I installed drywall myself after watching YouTube tutorials, painted the concrete floors with epoxy, and found second-hand furniture that I refurbished. My parents charged me $300 monthly for utilities and food, a sum that seemed reasonable until I discovered Ryan was living in the campus apartments for free, his rent paid directly by our parents. My best friend Jessica was the only person who truly saw the disparity. We met in freshman biology and became inseparable after pulling an all-nighter for our first major project. Her family lived 6 states away, and she often spent holidays with us when flights home were too expensive. She would notice how my mother would serve Ryan first at dinner, how my father would ask about his classes but not mine, how gifts for him were lavish while mine were practical. Were they treating you differently, or am I seeing things? She asked once after a particularly obvious Christmas where Ryan received a new laptop, while I got a planner and gas gift card. "It's just how it's always been," I replied, unwilling to voice the hurt aloud, as if speaking it would make it more real. "They've invested more in Ryan because he needs more help, I guess." But she shook her head. "You deserve the same support, Susanne. More even, since you're actually trying." Despite everything, I maintained hope that my graduation would be different. 4 years of maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working myself to exhaustion surely would merit recognition. As the ceremony approached, I allowed myself to dream a little. Maybe they'd help with the student loans I had accumulated. Maybe they'd offer to support me during my job search so I could focus on starting my career properly. Not a car, perhaps, but something to show they valued my effort. Ryan was now in his junior year, still floating through college on our parents' dime, still bringing home average grades and being celebrated for them. The golden boy who could do no wrong, whose mediocrity was treated as success, while my excellence was treated as the bare minimum expected. Yet still, I hoped. After all, I was about to graduate magna cum laude with a business degree and several promising job prospects. Surely that would finally be enough. The morning of graduation arrived with perfect May weather, sunshine warming the campus grounds as families gathered in their Sunday best. I spotted my parents and Ryan in the designated seating area, my mother frantically waving when she caught my eye. For a moment, my heart swelled with the simple joy of having them there. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches about future potential and the value of education. When they called my name, adding magna cum laude to the announcement, I heard a distinct whoop from the audience. It was Jessica, not my family, who made the loudest noise for my achievement. Still, I spotted my mother dabbing at her eyes as I crossed the stage, and that small gesture felt like victory. Afterwards, amid the chaos of thousands of graduates finding their families, I finally located mine near the science building. My mother hugged me briefly. My father patted my shoulder with a quick congratulations, kiddo, and Ryan immediately launched into a story about how bad the traffic had been getting there. The moment that should have been mine was already slipping away, but I pushed down the disappointment. The real celebration would be at home, where my mother had been planning a party for weeks. I had taken Friday off from all 3 jobs to help with preparations. While my mother handled the cooking, I cleaned the house from top to bottom, arranged flowers I'd purchased with my own money, and set up the backyard with string lights borrowed from Jessica. My father and Ryan were supposedly picking up the cake, but they returned 3 hours later with stories of running into friends and stopping for lunch. By 4 o'clock, relatives began arriving. Aunt Susanne brought her famous potato salad and a gift bag that she handed to me with a wink. Uncle Frank and his new wife brought a bottle of champagne. Grandma Wilson shuffled in with her walker, immediately asking where Ryan was. My cousins, distant relatives, and several family friends filled our backyard, creating a lively atmosphere that smelled of barbecue and summer. My cousin Amanda, who had always been kind to me, pulled me aside near the drink table. "You did amazing, Susanne. First person in the family to graduate with honors." Her genuine pride made me stand a little taller. "Thanks, Amanda. It wasn't easy, but it feels good to be done." She lowered her voice, glancing around. I heard Uncle George talking about Ryan's graduation gift earlier. Pretty generous. My stomach tightened, but I maintained my smile. I am sure whatever they got him will be nice. "You don't know." Her eyebrows shot up. "I thought surely you'd have been part of the discussion." Before I could press her for details, my mother called everyone to attention for dinner. I helped serve the food I'd spent hours preparing, making sure everyone had drinks and enough seating. As I finally took my own plate and sat down, I overheard my father speaking to Uncle Frank. "Well, Ryan might not have the grades his sister does, but the boy has charisma. He'll go far in life with that personality. The car is an investment in his future networking." The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Car? For Ryan? He wasn't even graduating for another year." I tried to catch more of the conversation, but the backyard was too noisy with overlapping discussions and laughter. Throughout dinner, relatives peppered me with the standard post-graduation questions. "Got a job lined up? Planning to move? Going to use that degree?" I answered politely, explaining that I had several promising interviews scheduled, but nothing confirmed yet. What I didn't mention was the position at Marshall Financial that Jessica had helped me apply for, where her cousin worked. The starting salary would finally give me independence, but I was superstitious about discussing it before the final interview next week. As the sky darkened and the string lights glowed against the twilight, I carried out the cake I'd picked up that morning when my father and Ryan had failed to do so. It was decorated with congratulations and my university colors. My mother immediately rearranged the table, centering the cake in front of where Ryan would sit, though he wasn't even there yet. I stood awkwardly holding plates and forks as she called for him to join us. When he sauntered out from the house, he was already wearing a new watch that I'd never seen before. The party converged around him as if he were the guest of honor, not me. I silently distributed cake, watching as my brother held court, describing his plans for his senior year while barely acknowledging that this party was supposedly for my graduation. After dessert, Aunt Susan sidled up to me. "Your mother says you've been living downstairs while in school. Planning to get your own place now?" "Hoping to," I replied, scraping leftover frosting into the trash. "Once I secure a job." She nodded sympathetically. "The housing market is brutal for your generation. Though I suppose they might let you stay a while longer, now that you've fixed up that basement so nicely." The comment struck me as odd, but before I could question it, my father called everyone into the living room. "Gift time for the graduate," he announced, and for one hopeful moment, I thought he meant me. We gathered in the living room, where my mother had arranged seating in a rough semicircle. The mantel behind my father was decorated with photos, predominantly of Ryan through various ages. My graduation portrait, taken by Jessica because I couldn't afford professional photos, was perched at the far end, slightly obscured by a trophy from Ryan's sophomore baseball season. "Everyone find a seat," my father announced, his voice carrying the jovial authority of a man who loved being the center of attention. "We've got something special to share tonight." I took a spot on the ottoman near the corner, leaving the couch space for older relatives. Ryan was directed to the armchair normally reserved for my father, a throne-like position facing everyone. My stomach knotted with the familiar feeling of being an audience member at the Ryan show, but I maintained my smile. This was still technically my graduation celebration, after all. My father cleared his throat dramatically. "As you all know, we've gathered to celebrate Susanne's graduation today. 4 years of hard work, and she's done us proud." A smattering of applause followed, with my Aunt Susan giving me a thumbs up. But my father continued, "We've also got another exciting announcement." He pulled an envelope from his pocket with the theatrical flourish of a magician. "Ryan, your mother and I have been so impressed with how you've matured these past few years. Taking college seriously, finding your path." I blinked in confusion. Ryan's grades had improved marginally at best, and he'd changed majors 3 times in 3 years. "We know you've got 1 more year to go," my father went on, "but we wanted to recognize the man you've become. Sometimes, a young man needs the right tools to succeed." He handed the envelope to Ryan, who accepted it with exaggerated surprise that fooled no one. My brother made a show of opening it slowly, building anticipation among the onlookers. When he pulled out a key attached to a luxury car brand keychain, gasps and excited murmurs rippled through the room. "A car!" Ryan exclaimed, with just enough feigned shock to maintain the pretense. "Dad, Mom, this is too much." My mother was already tearing up. "Nothing is too much for you, sweetie. You deserve it." Ryan jumped up, rushing to the window to look outside. There it was, the sleek silver sedan with a ridiculous red bow on top, parked in our driveway where everyone could see. How had I missed it when helping guests arrive? Had they kept it hidden at a neighbor's until now? Everyone followed Ryan outside, exclaiming over the new car while he popped the hood, showing off features he was already somehow familiar with. I hung back, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. This wasn't just an ordinary car. It was a brand new luxury sedan that easily cost over $40,000, more than all my student loans combined. Amanda caught my eye from across the room, her expression sympathetic. I gave her a small smile that felt brittle on my face. After a few minutes, my father herded everyone back inside. "Susanne," my mother said as people resettled, "we have something for you too, of course." Hope flickered briefly. Perhaps they'd saved my gift for after Ryan's moment. My father handed me an envelope similar to Ryan's, though noticeably thinner. I opened it with fingers that suddenly felt stiff and clumsy. Inside was no gift card, no check, no car key. Instead, I found a formal typed document with the header residential lease agreement. Stapled to it was an invoice for $800, labeled first month's rent. The room fell silent as I stared at the paper. $800 monthly for the basement I'd finished myself. $800 for a space that had been virtually uninhabitable before I spent my own money and labor transforming it. You're a college graduate now, an adult with a degree, my father explained, his tone suggesting he was bestowing wisdom rather than a financial burden. Your mother and I feel it's time you learned financial responsibility. I noticed Ryan smirking from his position by the window, still holding his car keys. $800 seems steep for the basement, Aunt Susan ventured, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Actually, it's below market rate for the area, my mother countered, sounding rehearsed. We researched rental properties. Plus, it includes utilities and kitchen privileges. Kitchen privileges. As if I were a tenant rather than their daughter. As if I hadn't been cooking half the family meals for years. Ryan chose that moment to jingle his new car keys. Guess I'll be driving myself to classes in style next semester, he gloated. Maybe I can give you a ride to one of your jobs, sis, save you some bus fare. A few relatives laughed nervously. Others found sudden interest in their drinks or the carpet pattern. My cousin Amanda looked openly appalled, while my grandmother nodded approvingly at my parents. This is an important step toward independence, my father added, apparently oblivious to the glaring disparity. Ryan's still in school, but you're ready to begin adult responsibilities. I sat frozen, the papers heavy in my hands. Adult responsibilities. As if I hadn't been juggling work, school, and family obligations for years. As if Ryan, with his fully funded education and now a luxury car, was somehow less capable of adult responsibilities than I was. What about Ryan's rent? The question slipped out before I could stop it, my voice quieter than intended. My mother waved dismissively. Ryan needs to focus on finishing school. He's got another year, and we don't want him distracted. Jessica had warned me this would happen. Just last week, Shed said, they're going to keep moving the goalposts for you while carrying Ryan across the finish line. I had defended them then. Now, with the evidence literally in my hands, I couldn't deny the truth of her words. Well, I found myself saying, the fake smile stretched painfully across my face, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate the consideration. I carefully folded the lease and invoice, placing them back in the envelope with hands that did not shake through sheer force of will. Around me, conversations gradually resumed, relief evident as the awkward moment passed. Ryan was already describing how he'd drive to the beach with friends that weekend, the center of attention once more. I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing escape from the suffocating weight of realization. This wasn't just about a car versus rent. This was the undeniable confirmation of what I'd tried for years to rationalize away. In my family, I would always be worth less. I locked the bathroom door behind me and sank onto the closed toilet lid, the envelope still clutched in my hand. In the mirror across from me, my reflection showed a woman in a blue dress, hair carefully styled for what should have been her celebration, face composed despite the storm raging inside. I barely recognized myself. The tap on my phone screen, illuminated with a text from Jessica. How bad is it? I'd texted her earlier with a quick Ryan's, getting a new car for his future graduation, while I got a bill. Call you later. I stared at her message, unsure how to compress the magnitude of what had just happened into words. Finally, I typed. They gave him a $40,000 car. They gave me an $800 monthly rent bill for the basement I renovated myself. With a lease agreement. Her response was immediate. Get out of there. Now. You can stay with me tonight. The suggestion was both tempting and terrifying. Leave. Just walk out. But where would I go? What would I take? What about my job interviews? My belongings? Yet as I sat there, memories flooded through me with new clarity. My 12th birthday, when Ryan had thrown a tantrum because he wasn't getting presents, so my parents had given him one of mine to keep him quiet. My high school graduation, when they had skipped the ceremony for Ryan's baseball tournament, even though he was benched most of the season. Every Christmas, every achievement, every milestone where the pattern repeated. Ryan celebrated, Susanne overlooked. I thought of the basement apartment I'd transformed. When I first moved down there, it had been concrete floors, exposed pipes, and spiderwebs. I had researched, saved, and worked weekends installing drywall, painting, laying carpet remnants I'd found on clearance. I'd added shelving, bought second-hand furniture I restored myself, even installed my own bathroom vanity after watching online tutorials. All while working 3 jobs and maintaining my GPA. $800 monthly. That was more than a third of my current income from all 3 jobs combined. With student loans coming due in 6 months, it was financially impossible. I texted Jessica back. Thinking. Need to plan. Rising to my feet, I splashed cold water on my face and reapplied the minimal makeup I'd worn for the occasion. Then I ventured out, walking through my childhood home with new eyes. The hallway where Ryan's sports trophies lined the wall, while my academic awards were relegated to a single small shelf in the corner. The living room where family photos featured Ryan prominently, with me often on the edges or absent entirely. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook out of necessity, because my mother was too busy making Ryan's favorite meals to teach me. From the living room came the sound of my father regaling guests with stories of Ryan's exploits, my graduation seemingly forgotten. I stepped outside onto the back porch, needing air, and found my cousin Amanda sitting alone with a glass of wine. That was messed up, she said without preamble. The car versus rent thing. I sank into the chair beside her, suddenly exhausted. It's always been this way. I just never wanted to see it so clearly. What are you going to do? I looked up at the stars, surprisingly visible despite the suburban setting. For the first time that day, I felt a strange calm settling over me. I've been calculating how much value I bring to this household, I admitted. The cooking, cleaning, renovations, even emotional labor. If I were paid minimum wage for all of it, they'd owe me thousands. Amanda nodded slowly. They have no idea what they're about to lose, do they? In that moment, something crystallized within me. She was right. They had no idea of my value, because I'd never required them to acknowledge it. I'd accepted the scraps of their attention, the inequity of their love, the burden of their expectations, while asking for nothing in return. I had a job interview on Tuesday with Marshall Financial, where Jessica had connections. The starting salary would be enough to support myself completely. I'd been planning to save for a few months by staying home, building a cushion before moving out. But now, my phone buzzed again. Jessica, I've got my spare room ready for you. No pressure, but it's here if you need it. For as long as you need. As I stared at her message, I heard Ryan through the open window, loudly discussing how he'd need a parking permit for his new car at school. My mother was promising to take care of it, of course. Another text arrived, this one from the hiring manager at Marshall Financial, confirming Tuesday's interview and mentioning they were very impressed with my resume and preliminary assessments. The universe was offering me a door. All I had to do was walk through it. I replied to Jessica, "I'll be there tonight." Late. Don't wait up. Then I pocketed my phone, straightened my shoulders, and returned to the party. I would play my role one last time, the dutiful daughter, the supportive sister. I would smile and help serve dessert and clean up dishes. I would thank guests for coming to celebrate my graduation. But when the house grew quiet, when the night wrapped the neighborhood in darkness, I would pack my essentials and leave. Not in anger or teenage rebellion, but as the adult my parents claimed they wanted me to be making a calculated decision based on value, worth, and self-respect. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, with each minute that passed, each time Ryan mentioned his car or my parents beamed at him, the knot in my stomach loosened. By the time guests began departing, offering congratulations that felt hollow after witnessing the car versus rent spectacle, I was almost lightheaded with certainty. I would leave tonight, but not without documentation of exactly why. Not without a note that would make absolutely clear what they'd lost and why they'd lost it. For the first time in years, possibly my entire life, I felt truly in control of my own story. As the last guests trickled out around 10:30, I maintained my role in the family performance. I collected wine glasses from end tables, wrapped leftover food, and thanked relatives for their congratulation cards. My grandmother pressed a $20 bill into my hand with a whispered, "You can put this toward your rent, dear," completely missing the irony. In the kitchen, my mother was loading the dishwasher while my father and Ryan sat at the table, still admiring the car brochure and discussing insurance details. "Really appreciate you understanding about the rent situation, Susanne," my father said without looking up from the glossy pages. "It's important to learn financial independence." The rental agreement they gave me sat on the counter where I'd left it. $800 monthly for a space that had been unfinished storage before I transformed it. $800 while Ryan got free housing, tuition, meals, and now a luxury car. "No problem, Dad," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "After all, I am the responsible one, right?" "Exactly," he agreed, completely missing my tone. "Ryan's still finding his way, but you've always been so self-sufficient." Ryan looked up from the brochure, twirling his new keys around his finger. "Maybe Y'all finally fix that wonky shelf in the downstairs bathroom now that you're paying for the place," he smirked. "Renters have responsibilities." My mother laughed as if he'd said something charming, rather than insulting the renovation work I'd done myself. "Oh, and Susanne," she added, "since y'all be using the kitchen regularly, your father and I thought you could take over the Sunday meal prep for everyone. It's only fair since y'all be using the appliances." I stood frozen by the sink, a half-washed serving platter in my hands. Not only was I expected to pay rent, but also provide free cooking labor for the household. Before I could respond, Ryan stretched and yawned dramatically. "I am taking the car out tomorrow to show the guys. Might need some gas money to fill the tank, Mom." "Of course, sweetie," my mother immediately replied. "Check my purse in the morning." The serving platter nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. I'd been paying for my own gas since I'd saved enough from my coffee shop job to buy a 15-year-old Honda during sophomore year. The car that had broken down last month, which I'd been taking buses without since I couldn't afford the $1,200 repair. I set the platter down carefully before I could drop it. "I am pretty tired. Think I'll head downstairs now." "Don't forget to turn off the lights," my father called after me, barely glancing away from Ryan's brochure. "Electricity isn't free, you know. Not like when you were a kid." I paused at the doorway, wondering if this was the moment to speak up. But looking at them, gathered around the table, my father and Ryan bonding over the car, my mother hovering attentively, I'd never felt more like an outsider in my own home. Instead, I descended the stairs to my basement apartment. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, surveying the space I'd created. The walls I'd carefully painted a soft blue-gray. The second-hand furniture I'd restored with sandpaper and patience. The bookshelves I'd built from lumber and brackets. The desk where I'd written papers until 3 in the morning after closing shifts at the restaurant. $800 a month. For this space that I'd built with my own hands, in a house where I was clearly unwelcome except as a source of income and free labor. I moved to my desk and opened the laptop, a refurbished model I'd bought after saving for months. Opening a new document, I began to type. The first attempt was too angry, the words tumbling out in a furious stream. I deleted it. The second try was too pleading, too desperate for the love and recognition I'd never received. I deleted that too. On the third attempt, I found the right tone. Factual. Detailed. Professional. The kind of document I'd submit to a business professor, not an emotional letter to family. To Martha and George Anderson, I began, formally using their first names rather than mom and dad. This letter serves as my formal notice of vacancy, effective immediately. I continued with a breakdown of financial contributions I'd made to the household over the years. $300 monthly for basement utilities since sophomore year. Approximately 20 hours weekly of unpaid household labor, cooking, cleaning, yard work, which, at minimum wage, equated to over $20,000 of services over 4 years. Materials for basement renovation. $2,435.63, with receipts attached. I itemized the babysitting I'd done for neighborhood children to contribute to household income during high school. The catering assistance I'd provided to my mother's business without compensation. The times I'd covered Ryan's share of family gifts because he forgot or spent his money elsewhere. My fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing certainty. This wasn't a child lashing out. This was an accounting. A reckoning. In the section titled Educational Support Disparity, I outlined the difference between my college experience and Ryan's. My 3 jobs versus his 0. My 60% scholarship versus his 0%. My student loans versus his none. My academic achievements versus his mediocrity. I calculated the approximate value of his car, including insurance, maintenance, and gas, compared to the rent I was being charged for a space I'd improved with my own labor and funds. Finally, I reached the conclusion. After careful consideration of the above factors, I find the proposed rental agreement neither equitable nor sustainable. Moreover, it represents the culmination of a pattern that has been evident throughout my upbringing. I have consistently been held to higher standards while receiving less support, recognition, and resources than my sibling. As the adult you have encouraged me to be, I am making the responsible decision to remove myself from an arrangement that is financially exploitative and emotionally detrimental. I have secured alternative housing and will be pursuing professional opportunities commensurate with my qualifications and work ethic. I will retrieve the remainder of my belongings at a later date. Please do not attempt to contact me for 30 days, as I will be focusing on establishing my independence, the independence you have suddenly deemed so important. The total calculated value of my uncompensated contributions to this household is listed in the attached spreadsheet, should you wish to understand exactly what you are losing with my departure. Respectfully, Susanne Anderson. I read through the document twice, making small adjustments for clarity and tone. Then I created a detailed spreadsheet with all the financial calculations, dates, and values. I printed 3 copies of everything, one for the kitchen table, one for my records, and a third to leave on my bed. As I slid the papers into folders, I heard the familiar creaking of stairs that indicated my family was heading to bed. I waited, listening as bathroom doors opened and closed, as voices murmured goodnights, as silence finally settled over the house. Only then did I begin to pack. Working methodically in the silence of midnight, I gathered only what was essential. Clothing for my interview and the week ahead. Important documents: passport, birth certificate, social security card, diplomas. My laptop and phone charger. Toiletries. The jewelry box containing my grandmother's necklace, the only family heirloom ever given to me. Each item I considered, asking myself, is this necessary? Can it be replaced? Does it serve my future or only tie me to my past? So much of what surrounded me represented years of making do, of stretching dollars, of creating comfort from cast-offs. The bookshelves I'd built myself. The desk lamp I'd rewired. The curtains I'd sewn from clearance fabric. They represented my ingenuity, but also my accommodation of a situation that had never been fair. I decided to leave most of it behind. Not as abandoned property, but as physical evidence of my value. Let them see daily what I'd built, what I'd contributed, what they had taken for granted. From my closet, I pulled out the small emergency suitcase I'd prepared months ago, a habit Jessica had taught me. Always have a go bag for unexpected opportunities, she said, though I suspect she meant exactly this kind of escape. Inside was a week of basic clothing, copies of essential documents, and $300 cash saved in small increments. As I added my interview outfit a tailored navy dress with a matching blazer, I caught sight of the family photo on my nightstand. The four of us at the beach 3 summers ago, one of the rare pictures where I was actually centered in the frame. On impulse, I removed it from its dollar store frame and packed it too. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of what had been and what I was leaving behind. A moment of inspiration struck. I found a marker and carefully blacked out my image in the duplicate photo that sat on the upstairs hallway console, leaving a Susanne-shaped void in the family portrait. Subtle but unmistakable once noticed. By 1:30 in the morning, my essential packing was complete. I surveyed the room one last time, straightening the bedspread, aligning the desk chair, creating an appearance of order that belied the magnitude of change about to occur. On the bed, I left one copy of my letter and financial accounting. The calculated total of my uncompensated contributions startling in its precision. $27,412.40. I placed a second copy in an envelope addressed to my parents and propped it against the coffee maker where my mother would find it first thing. The third copy went into my bag, documentation for myself of why this step was necessary. Before leaving my room, I looked at the small collection of cards I'd received at the party. Opening each one, I removed cash and checks, noting the amounts and senders in my phone so I could send proper thank you notes later. $430 in total, not much, but enough to help bridge the gap until my first paycheck if the Marshall financial interview went well. Carrying my suitcase up the stairs required careful navigation of each creaking step. At the top, I paused, listening for any sound that might indicate someone was awake. The house remained silent, except for Ryan's faint snoring from behind his door. The door decorated with sports pennants and never once charged against his allowance or burdened with expectations of rent. In the kitchen, I placed the envelope prominently against the coffee maker, securing it with the sugar bowl my mother used every morning. Then, unable to resist a final touch of symbolism, I placed the car brochure beneath it, open to the page showing the vehicle's price. The last step before leaving was the most practical. I ordered a rideshare from my phone, setting the pickup location at the corner rather than directly in front of the house. While waiting for confirmation, I wrote a brief note to tape to the front door. Alarm code changed. New code texted to Mom's phone tomorrow. A small mercy to prevent them from thinking there had been a break-in when they found me gone, but not enough information to immediately follow me. The rideshare app pinged softly confirmation of a driver 5 minutes away. With one last look around the dark kitchen, where I'd spent so many hours cooking for a family that had never truly valued me, I shouldered my bag and stepped out the side door, locking it behind me with the key I would never use again. The night air held the lingering warmth of late spring, scented with honeysuckle from the neighbor's fence. I walked quickly to the corner, staying in shadows out of habit rather than necessity. When the car arrived, the driver merely nodded at my simple good evening, asked no questions about a young woman with luggage at nearly 2 in the morning. Watching my childhood home recede through the rear window, I felt a complex wave of emotions: grief for what should have been, relief for what would no longer be, anxiety about the uncertain future, but predominantly a sense of rightness. Of alignment with my own worth for perhaps the first time. 20 minutes later, the car pulled up in front of Jessica's apartment building. Despite my text telling her not to wait up, I spotted her silhouette in the first-floor window. Before I could even knock, she opened the door, wordlessly pulling me into a fierce hug. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered against my hair. "You know that, right?" I nodded, suddenly too exhausted for words. She took my suitcase, leading me to the small spare room shed prepared. Clean sheets on the futon, fresh towels on the chair, a small vase of convenience store flowers on the windowsill. "We can talk details tomorrow," she said. "For now, just rest." That first night away from my family's house, I slept more deeply than I had in years. No listening for sounds that might indicate I was needed. No mental calculations of hours until my next shift. No weight of unmet expectations pressing down on my chest. When I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, my first thought was wonder at the absence of dread. My second was the realization that my phone showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages, beginning around 7 a.m. family breakfast time, when they would have found my letter. I didn't read them. Instead, I silenced the phone and joined Jessica for coffee at her small kitchen table. "They're probably freaking out," she said, nodding at my dark screen. Probably, I agreed, surprised by my own calm. But for once, their emotions aren't my responsibility. She raised her mug in salute. "Welcome to the first day of your actual life." Later, I would need to prepare for my interview. Later, I would need to figure out longer-term housing. Later, I would need to craft responses to family members who deserved them, like cousin Amanda, who had seen the truth and validated it. But in that moment, sitting in a borrowed chair in a borrowed room with borrowed time stretching before me, I allowed myself to simply exist without obligation. To breathe without constraint. To be valued exactly as I was, by someone who had always seen me clearly. The beginning of independence tastes a lot like freedom, I realized. And a little bit like justice. The first week after my departure passed in a blur of practical matters. My interview at Marshall Financial went surprisingly well, my confidence bolstered by the clarity that comes with standing in your own truth. When the hiring manager commented on my poise under pressure, I nearly laughed. After years of invisibility in my own home, selling myself to strangers felt remarkably straightforward. The job offer came 3 days later, starting salary $48,000 annually, health benefits, and 2 weeks paid vacation. More money than Id ever had access to, earned entirely through my own merit. Meanwhile, the attempts at contact from my family evolved in predictable stages. First came the confused messages. "Where's Susanne? What note? Is this a joke?" Then angry demands. "Call us immediately. How dare you leave like this? After everything we've done for you." Next came manipulation. "Your mother's crying. Grandma's worried sick. Ryan's upset you didn't say goodbye." I responded to none of them, maintaining the 30-day boundary Id established in my letter. Jessica screened my emails, deleting the most toxic without showing me. Friends from university rallied around with offers of support clothes, job leads, even a spare laptop when they worried mine might be tracked. With my first paycheck still weeks away, I accepted a temporary reception position through a staffing agency, working evenings after spending days apartment hunting. By day 10, Id secured a small studio within walking distance of Marshall Financial, incredibly tiny, but entirely mine, with a lease in my name alone. On day 14, my father showed up at Jessica's apartment. I wasn't there. Id already left for my temporary job, but Jessica later recounted the confrontation. He demanded to know where I was, insisting I was being childish and ungrateful. Jessica, 5'4" of righteous fury, stood in her doorway and refused to yield. "Did you even read her letter?" she asked him. The calculations of everything she contributed while Ryan coasted. "That's different," he supposedly sputtered. "Boys need more support. It's science." Jessica had laughed in his face. "Then support him. But don't pretend it's about teaching Susanne responsibility when it's really about exploiting her." When he threatened to call the police, claiming I was in danger or being influenced, Jessica calmly held up her phone. I am recording this entire conversation to document harassment. Susanne is 27 years old, gainfully employed, and has chosen to distance herself from your family. Any police officer will tell you the same. He left without further argument, but the encounter shook me when Jessica relayed it later. Not because I feared him, but because it confirmed what Id always suspected. They saw me as property, not as a person. My independence was inconceivable to them, outside the parameters they defined. Week 3 brought an unexpected development. My mother left a voicemail, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "I found your spreadsheet," she said after identifying herself as if I wouldn't recognize her voice. "The one with all the numbers." I didn't realize I didn't understand what you'd been doing all these years. There was a long pause, the sound of paper rustling. We should talk. When you're ready. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an admission of inequity. But it was the first acknowledgement that my perspective might contain some validity, and that tiny crack in her certainty represented more growth than I'd seen in decades. I didn't call back. Not yet. But I saved the message. Ryan, predictably, vacillated between angry texts. How could you do this to Mom and Dad? And self-centered ones, can I have your TV since you're not using it? I blocked his number after the latter, deciding that some relationships might never be salvageable. On day 29, exactly one day before my self-imposed contact restriction would expire, Amanda reached out through social media. Just checking if you're okay. No pressure to respond. Family dinner was awkward last week. Your empty chair spoke volumes. Proud of you. I sent her my new email address with a brief but warm response. Of all my relatives, she alone had consistently seen me. That deserved acknowledgement. Day 30 arrived with no grand revelation, no dramatic reconciliation. Just me, waking up in my new apartment, preparing for my first official day at Marshall Financial. I wore the navy dress and blazer, added my grandmother's necklace, and looked at myself in the mirror above my second-hand dresser. The woman reflected back was different from the one who had sat frozen with a rent bill in her hands 1 month earlier. This woman stood straighter. This woman knew her worth down to the penny. This woman had broken a generational pattern of inequity by simply refusing to perpetuate it. I took a deep breath and texted my mother. I am safe. I am well. I am employed. I'll consider meeting for coffee in a public place next weekend, if you're ready to listen more than speak. Her response came almost immediately. Name the place and time. Well, be there. The we gave me pause. I'd specified meeting her alone, yet shed automatically included my father. Another small evidence that boundaries would remain a necessary practice, not a one-time event. I responded. Just you. Not Dad. Not Ryan. Just you listening to me. Sunday. 2 p.m. The coffee shop on Maple Street. This time, the pause stretched longer before her reply arrived. Okay. Just me. Those two simple words represented possibly the first time Shed prioritized my needs over the family unit's cohesion. A small victory, but meaningful. The meeting itself, when it happened, was neither a Hollywood reconciliation nor a dramatic confrontation. My mother arrived alone as promised, ordered a small coffee with too much sugar, and sat across from me with hands that trembled slightly. You look different, were her first words. I am different, I replied. She nodded, eyes darting around the cafe as if seeking escape routes. Your father's furious. He says you're punishing us for loving your brother. I am not punishing anyone, I said calmly. I am simply refusing to accept being valued less. There's a difference. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She denied, deflected, justified until I simply stood to leave. Only then did she finally ask the question that mattered. What would make this right? I sat back down. Nothing can erase the past. But going forward, equal treatment, acknowledgement of the pattern, no more financial exploitation, and time apart for me to build my life without the weight of your expectations. She didn't promise anything that day. Didn't suddenly transform into the mother I'd always wanted. But she listened, really listened perhaps for the first time. And when we parted, her carefully think about what you've said carried more sincerity than empty platitudes. 6 months passed. I thrived at Marshall Financial, earning my first promotion. I dated briefly, made new friends through work, joined a community garden. I spoke with my mother monthly, brief conversations that remained superficial but civil. My father sent a Christmas card with no personal message. Ryan didn't contact me at all. At the 1-year mark of my departure, I agreed to a family dinner. Neutral territory, a restaurant with public witnesses, and my own transportation. Jessica helped me prepare, role-playing difficult conversations, establishing emergency exits if needed. They arrived together, my father noticeably grayer, my mother thinner, Ryan subdued in a way I'd never seen. We engaged in careful small talk while studying menus and ordering drinks. The tension vibrated beneath mundane questions about weather and traffic. Finally, after our entrees arrived, my father cleared his throat. "It assumed you'd come back once you'd made your point," he said, fork hovering above his untouched salmon. "A year seems excessive for a lesson." I set down my water glass carefully. "This wasn't a lesson for you. It was a boundary for me." "We miss you," my mother interjected. "The house feels empty." Ryan studied his plate. "They rented out your room to some college kid," he muttered. $800 a month, just like they wanted from you." I noted, but didn't comment on the they rather than we. A small indication of separation I'd never witnessed before. The dinner continued with careful navigation around emotional landmines. My father made one attempt to suggest my independence experiment had gone on long enough, quickly silenced by my mother's hand on his arm. Ryan mentioned his struggle finding a job after graduation, his tone suggesting comparison to my success, but lacking his previous entitlement. When the check came, I reached for it. My father began to object, then stopped himself, visibly recalculating the dynamics at play. I paid for the entire meal, a symbolic reversal I hadn't planned but felt deeply right in the moment. Outside the restaurant, standing in the cooling evening air, my mother hugged me briefly. Not the performative embrace of past family gatherings, but something tentative and real. "I am proud of you," she whispered. "I don't understand all of it, but I am proud." My father offered an awkward handshake. "The house is always open to you," he said, the closest to reconciliation he could manage. Ryan hung back, hands in pockets until the last moment. "I got my own place," he said suddenly. "Not as nice as yours probably, but I am paying for it myself." The simple statement, delivered without expectation of praise, suggested growth I hadn't anticipated. I nodded, acknowledging the effort it represented. "Well done," I said simply. As they walked toward their car, I remained on the sidewalk, watching the family that had shaped me but no longer defined me. The anger that had fueled my initial departure had mellowed into something more complex, a mixture of sadness for what could have been, acceptance of what was, and determination about what would be. Some relationships can be healed with time and honest conversation. Others can only be managed through careful boundaries and limited exposure. The true healing, I had discovered, wasn't in fixing my family, but in fixing my relationship with myself. In recognizing my worth wasn't determined by their perception, but by my own standards and actions. 1 year after leaving a note that changed everything, I stood firmly in the knowledge that unequal love creates unequal relationships, but unequal relationships don't have to create unequal lives. We write our own value stories, editing out the voices that diminish us, amplifying those that recognize our true worth. As I turned toward my car and my own separate life, I felt neither triumph nor regret, simply the quiet certainty of standing precisely where I was meant to be, on ground of my own choosing. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who couldn't see your worth? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about setting boundaries and finding your value. Remember that sometimes the quietest exits make the loudest statements. Thank you for listening, and may you always know exactly what you're worth.